The cold night air wrapped around the empty streets like a silent warning. Under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, an old, tattered blanket barely shielded a homeless man from the biting wind. Beside him, a scruffy dog lay curled up, its fur matted, its eyes alert. To most people passing by, they were just another forgotten pair, an old man down on his luck and his loyal companion. But what no one knew, not even the group of thugs who had been lurking in the shadows, was that the man they were about to rob wasn't just anyone. The gang of three stumbled out of a nearby alley, their laughter sharp and cruel against the quiet night. They were looking for trouble, their pockets light, their hearts even lighter. When they spotted the homeless man, a sinister grin spread across one of their faces. "Easy target," he muttered. They swaggered over, their boots echoing on the pavement, their confidence fed by the fact that no one would step in to stop them. "Hey, old man," one of them sneered, kicking at his worn-out bag. "What's in there? Any spare change?" His voice dripped with mockery as the others chuckled. The homeless man didn't react, only shifting slightly to place a protective hand on his dog. The dog let out a low growl, its instincts kicking in. One of the thugs scoffed, nudging it with his foot. "Look at this mutt," he snorted. "Bet it's as useless as its owner." The others laughed, emboldened by the silence of the street. They didn't know, how could they, that they were standing on the edge of a moment that would change everything. Just as one of them reached down to snatch the man's bag, a hand shot out, fast, controlled, and deliberate. In the blink of an eye, the thug was on the ground, gasping for breath, his arm twisted at an impossible angle. The laughter stopped. The air turned thick with shock. The other two froze, their eyes darting between their fallen friend and the man who had been hunched over just moments ago. Slowly, the homeless man straightened. The blanket slipped from his shoulders, revealing a familiar face. A face they had seen 100 times before, on screens, in movies, in viral clips of kindness and humility. Keanu Reeves. For the first time that night, the silence wasn't empty, it was heavy. The thugs stumbled back, their bravado crumbling. The world-famous actor, known for his calm demeanor and generosity, had just taken one of them down without breaking a sweat. But Keanu wasn't angry. He wasn't even smug. He simply looked at them with a quiet intensity, his dog now sitting up beside him, staring with the same unwavering gaze. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice steady, almost gentle. The thugs exchanged panicked glances, their minds racing. Run, fight, apologize. And then, in an instant, everything shifted again. One of the thugs took a shaky step back, his breath uneven. His mind was struggling to process what he had just seen. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. A homeless guy wasn't supposed to fight back, let alone move like that. And of all people, Keanu Reeves, it didn't make sense. The man they had mocked just moments ago now stood tall, his eyes calm but unshakable. He didn't look angry, but something about him made it impossible to look away. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The thug on the ground groaned, clutching his arm, his earlier arrogance replaced with pain. His friends hesitated, their bodies tense, caught between fear and confusion. Keanu's dog stood beside him, ears perked, watching them closely. It wasn't growling anymore, but there was something in its posture, something controlled, just like its owner. One of the thugs, a wiry guy with a scar along his jaw, swallowed hard. "How?" he stammered, barely able to get the words out. You're not supposed to be here." Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying them. "And you are." His voice was level, almost too calm, as if he already knew the answer but wanted to hear it anyway. The tallest of the three, the one who had kicked the bag, clenched his fists. He had been in plenty of fights before, had intimidated plenty of people. But something about this felt different. He could feel it in his gut. This wasn't some ordinary man down on his luck. This was Keanu Reeves. And suddenly, it hit him. Keanu had trained for years in martial arts for his action films. The way he had moved, the speed, the precision, it wasn't just for the cameras. It was real. A nervous laugh escaped from the scared thug. "All right, man," he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice wavered. "We didn't mean anything by it, just having some fun." Keanu didn't blink. "Is that what this is?" His tone wasn't accusing, just curious. That somehow made it worse. The leader of the group, still gripping his injured friend's arm, shifted uncomfortably. His mind raced. They needed to get out of there, but his pride wouldn't let him just run. He forced himself to smirk. "Whatever, man. You're just some actor. You think you're a hero." Keanu's expression didn't change. "No," he said simply. "But I know what it's like to lose everything. To be alone, and I know it doesn't have to be this way." The words hung in the air. For a second, something flickered across the leader's face, something almost like recognition. But just as quickly, he shoved it aside. He grabbed his friend and motioned for the others to follow. "We're done here." Keanu didn't stop them. He just watched as they hurried off into the night, their footsteps uneven, their confidence shattered. His dog let out a quiet huff, as if sensing the shift in the air. Keanu sighed, his breath visible in the cold. He knelt beside his dog, running a gentle hand through its fur. "Some people just need time," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. But even as he said it, he had a feeling this wasn't the last time he would see them. As the thugs disappeared into the night, Keanu remained still, his fingers resting gently on his dog's fur. The city was always full of stories, some of them loud, demanding attention, while others played out in the quiet corners where no one was watching. He had learned that a long time ago. Tonight was no different. He glanced down at his dog, who gazed up at him with knowing eyes. "They'll be back," he murmured. The dog's ears twitched as if in agreement. Keanu wasn't sure why he felt that way. Maybe it was the way the leader hesitated before leaving or the flicker of something human in his eyes. Whatever it was, the night wasn't finished with them yet. Across the street, hidden in the shadow of an old convenience store, another figure had been watching. A woman in a worn-out coat, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. She had seen it all, the attempted robbery, the unexpected turn, the way the thugs had retreated like startled animals. But more than anything, she had seen Keanu. She had recognized him instantly, even under the street lamp's weak glow. But what was he doing here? Disguised as a homeless man, no less. Her breath came in slow, measured beats as she debated what to do. Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous actors in the world, was living on the streets, or at least pretending to. And nobody knew. She turned away before he could notice her, her thoughts racing. If she played this right, there was a story here. Something big. But something about the way he had handled those men made her pause. This wasn't for show. He hadn't wanted attention. He had been waiting. Meanwhile, the three thugs stormed down the alley, their confidence stripped away. The injured one, still clutching his arm, hissed through his teeth. Who the hell was that guy? The leader didn't answer right away. His mind was still replaying the moment Keanu had looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something else. Something he couldn't name. It made his stomach twist. "He's just some actor," the scarred one muttered. "We could have taken him if we really wanted to." The leader shot him a sharp look. "Could we?" His voice was low, thoughtful. He had spent his whole life sizing people up, knowing when to push and when to back off. And Keanu, he wasn't like anyone they had ever met. A silence settled between them. The night felt colder now, the streets less familiar. The leader let out a slow breath, glancing back toward the street lamp where they had first seen him. Something about all of this felt unfinished. And then, as if the city itself was conspiring against them, a car rolled up to the curb. The back window lowered just enough for them to see the man inside. A man who did not look pleased. "Get in," the voice commanded. The leader hesitated for only a second before pulling open the door. Whatever was happening tonight, it wasn't over. Not even close. The leader hesitated only for a second before pulling open the car door and sliding into the back seat. His two friends exchanged uncertain glances before following, the injured one wincing as he cradled his arm. The door shut with a heavy finality, sealing them inside. The man in the backseat barely moved, but his presence filled the small space. He was older, dressed in a sharp black coat, his eyes cold and calculating. The street lights cast shifting shadows across his face as he studied them in silence. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the low hum of the car engine the only sound. "You were supposed to bring me something useful," the man finally said, his voice smooth but edged with quiet displeasure. His gaze lingered on the leader waiting. The leader shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "We thought he was just some homeless guy," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "Turns out he wasn't." The man raised an eyebrow, his fingers tapping slowly against the leather seat. And who exactly was he? The leader hesitated. Saying it out loud felt strange, like something out of a dream. Keanu Reeves. The air in the car changed. The man's fingers stopped tapping. His eyes darkened, flickering with something unreadable. Then, after a moment, he exhaled through his nose, a sound that wasn't quite amusement, but not quite anger either. "Well," the man murmured, leaning back into the shadows. "That is interesting." The leader didn't like the way he said it. Meanwhile, back on the street, Keanu remained in his spot, feeling the weight of the night settle over him. His dog had relaxed, but Keanu knew better than to assume it was over. The way the leader had looked at him before leaving, the hesitation in his movements, it wasn't the look of a man who was done with something. Keanu sighed, shifting his blanket over his shoulders again. He had been out here long enough to know when trouble had just begun. Across the street, the woman who had been watching earlier now stood near the entrance of an all-night diner, her phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over the screen. She could post something. A picture, a video. It would go viral instantly. Keanu Reeves, alone on the streets, taking down thugs like a real-life action hero. But she hesitated. Something about the way he had handled himself, the way he had spoken to them, made her wonder. He wasn't just playing a role. He was out here for a reason. But why? And more importantly, was he in danger? Before she could decide what to do, a sleek black car rolled slowly past the street lamp where Keanu sat. It didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. But the tinted window rolled down just enough for a pair of eyes to lock onto him for a brief, chilling second before disappearing into the night. Keanu didn't move, but his dog tensed beside him. He had felt it too. This wasn't over, not even close. Keanu kept his gaze steady as the black car vanished down the empty street. His dog let out a low huff, shifting closer to him. He reached down, scratching behind its ears, but his mind was already working through the possibilities. That car wasn't random. Someone had been watching, someone who knew. He wasn't wrong to think this wasn't over. Across the street, the woman's stomach twisted. She had seen the car too, the way the window lowered just enough, the way Keanu had tensed even though he barely moved. It wasn't normal, and now she was more certain than ever. This wasn't just some Hollywood star looking for a real-world experience. Something else was happening here. She made a decision. Pulling her hood up, she crossed the street, her footsteps careful, calculated. She stopped a few feet away, not wanting to startle him. "You okay?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Keanu looked up, his expression unreadable for a moment before a small, almost knowing smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You've been watching," he said simply. She swallowed. "So have they." She nodded toward where the car had disappeared. Keanu glanced down at his dog, then back at her. "What do you want?" His tone wasn't cold, just direct. She hesitated. The truth was, she wasn't sure. But something about this whole thing felt bigger than just a strange run-in on the street. "I want to know why you're here." Keanu studied her, the silence stretching between them. Most people, if they recognized him, would have already pulled out their phones, already started recording. But she hadn't. That meant something. Finally, he exhaled and leaned back slightly. Maybe the same reason you are, he said. She frowned. And what reason is that? Keanu's gaze flickered toward the shadows where the car had been, looking for answers. Before she could respond, another noise broke through the quiet, a sharp, distant shout. It wasn't from the street, but from deeper in the alley behind them. Keanu's dog's ears perked up instantly. He and the woman exchanged a glance. Then, without a word, he stood and started moving toward the sound. The woman hesitated for only a second before following. The alley was dark, the buildings leaning close together, casting deep shadows that swallowed the streetlights. The sound had come from deeper in, past the scattered trash bins and the flickering neon sign of a closed shop. And then they saw him, the leader of the gang from earlier, slumped against the wall, his breath coming in uneven gasps. His lip was split, his hands trembling as he clutched his side. The tough guy act was gone. This wasn't the same cocky street thug from before. This was someone who had just realized he was in way over his head. Keanu slowed his steps, his voice low. What happened? The thug lifted his head, his eyes filled with something Keanu hadn't seen before. Not arrogance, not fear, desperation. They know who you are, he rasped. And now, they know I talked to you. Keanu's jaw tightened. The woman looked between them, her heart pounding. And then a sound of footsteps echoed in the alley behind them. Slow, deliberate, someone else was here. And they weren't alone. The footsteps in the alley grew closer, slow and deliberate, each step echoing like a countdown. Keanu didn't move, but his posture shifted slightly, more alert, more ready. His dog tensed beside him, ears twitching. The woman swallowed hard, her instincts screaming at her to run, but something kept her rooted in place. The injured thug against the wall looked terrified. A figure stepped out of the shadows, then another, and another. 3 men, all dressed in dark clothing, their expressions unreadable. But there was something controlled about the way they moved, something practiced. These weren't random street criminals. They knew what they were doing. The tallest one, standing in the center, tilted his head slightly. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice calm but edged with something dangerous. Keanu exhaled slowly, his hands still loose at his sides. I get that a lot. The man smirked. Not like this. His eyes flicked to the injured thug. You talk too much. The thug shrank against the wall, his breath shaky. I didn't. I swear I didn't. The man held up a hand, silencing him. Then his gaze returned to Keanu. You should walk away. Keanu didn't blink. And if I don't? The man sighed as if this was all very inconvenient. Then, in one swift motion, he reached into his coat, but Keanu was faster. Before the man's hand even touched whatever was inside, Keanu stepped forward, twisting his wrist just enough to knock him off balance. In the same motion, he pivoted, using the man's momentum against him, sending him crashing into the alley wall. The other 2 lunged, but Keanu was already moving. A precise strike to the first one's shoulder sent him stumbling, while a sharp kick to the second's knee buckled his stance. The woman gasped, barely able to process how quickly everything had shifted. The leader growled in frustration, recovering fast, his hand finally reaching inside his coat. But before he could pull anything out, Keanu's dog let out a deep, menacing snarl, stepping between them with bared teeth. Everything froze. The leader locked eyes with the dog, hesitated, then exhaled sharply. He slowly raised his hands in surrender. Keanu didn't let his guard down, but he stepped back just enough to let the moment settle. Tell whoever sent you, he said quietly, that I'm not playing their game. The leader studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slight nod to his men, he backed away, disappearing into the darkness of the alley. The others followed, one of them limping slightly. Silence returned. The injured thug let out a breath of relief, sliding down the wall. You don't know what you just got yourself into, he muttered. Keanu turned to him, his expression unreadable. Maybe, but neither do they. The woman stared at him, still processing what had just happened. What do they want? She asked. Keanu glanced toward the empty alley where the man had vanished. His dog nudged his hand, sensing his thoughts. He sighed, shaking his head. "Not me," he said, and for the first time, the woman noticed something in his eyes, something deeper than just concern. A quiet realization, a puzzle piece clicking into place. Whoever was behind this, whoever had sent those men, they weren't after Keanu Reeves. They were after something much bigger. And this was just the beginning. The night air felt heavier now, as if the city itself had been holding its breath. The woman glanced at Keanu, searching his face for answers he wasn't quite ready to give. His dog, sensing the tension fading, sat beside him, tail flicking in quiet thought. The injured thug groaned, shifting slightly against the wall. He wasn't in great shape, but he was alive. And despite everything, there was something in his eyes that looked almost relieved. Maybe he had been waiting for something to go wrong, for his past to catch up with him. Maybe tonight had shown him just how close he had come to an ending he wasn't ready for. Keanu crouched beside him. "You've got a choice to make," he said softly. "They'll come back. You know that." The thug nodded, exhaling shakily. He did know. Keanu stood up, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket. He scribbled something on it, then handed it to him. "When you're ready," he said.